Welcome, everyone. And hi, Chris. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to be sitting down and talking with you.
Nice to meet you. And yeah, thanks for inviting me.
I had to. I mean, when Marty said you need to talk to Chris, I just jumped in. So thank you again for saying yes. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. Tell us, where are you joining us from? It's always nice to say hello to people from all over the world who tune in. And welcome to Product Power Play, a LinkedIn Live series where we host industry leaders to uncover career inflection points that have shaped their product career over the years through some real candid conversations. And I'm really excited to be talking with Chris today because, Chris, I don't think I've shared this with you, but I've been silently following you for years. And and I think a lot of what you do has really personally and professionally impacted, I think, how I have been a PM at companies and how I later on became a product leader and really bringing about that shift in the product culture. I think your idea about pilot teams and all of the things that you've done, I think, has, again, deeply influenced me and also how we run our programs in PMDojo. So thank you for doing what you do, and really excited.
So kind of you to say that. Thank you. That's the sort of those are the sort of praise that I actually makes me the most happy. So thank you.
Always a pleasure. And folks, I am Baski Mukherjee. I'm the founder of PMDojo, where our mission is to help women and minorities really fast track their career in product, but not just with learning theory or some certifications, because we all know that doesn't work. But we really help women and minorities get real world practical skills and competencies that are needed to not only make that shift into product management, by actually working in empowered product teams, but also for ICs and product leaders to be getting those competencies and driving that change and shift in their roles to rise up in product leadership roles. And so with that, let's get started with our episode today. If you have questions, please drop them in the comments. I'm seeing them here, and I'd love to take some audience questions towards the end. So with that, Chris, again, welcome. You have such a stellar background because I was looking at everything that you've done over the last so many years and decades. You have built products, you have led product teams and built product teams in companies such as Vontu and Symantec and Lookout. You've been a partner in SVPG now for a number of years. You have patents under your name. You've worked not in one, two, but multiple domains across AI. And I mean, the list just goes on and on and on, right? And so how have you done all of this? Let's just start there.
How have I done it all? That's a great way to ask it. Honestly, it's just been an incredible amount of luck and good fortune. I think for all of us, I really do think that's what happens. We're presented with opportunities and kind of people at every step. And I don't think we, as people and, in our career, I don't think we engineer those opportunities. We may be smart enough to take advantage of them or see them for what they could possibly be, but there's just a huge amount of luck. And, in my case, I've had a lot of people who were willing to take a chance on me at various times in my career when maybe that was against better judgment. I'm not sure I would have taken a chance on me, but I'll take credit for making the best of those opportunities. But yeah, lots of luck.
Lots of luck. So that is an interesting phrasing, Chris, because I know a lot of people just kind of dish luck, and there is this lots of folks who believe luck has a very small role to play. It's all about hard work, and it's about being in the right place, right time, which I think is a little bit of luck too. Why do you attribute so much to luck? Is it humility?
Well, I mean, I think, well, first of all, there's just been a lot of fortune in that I have been, just my background and my education. I went to a really good school. I had the sort of degree that got me into the right circles, at least at those times. So, I just don't want to discount, how much of that was really given to me in many ways. And just, I think it serves everybody to have a bit of humility about what you can and can't control. I don't want to be falsely modest, though, because of course, you do have to put yourself into positions where the opportunities might happen, and then you do have to take advantage of those opportunities. But I also think there's a real arrogance to putting too much on one's own agency in architecting their career. I think my career makes a lot of sense when I look back at it historically. I can really find the through line, and there is a story that made a lot of sense. But I'd be lying if I said that I engineered that. I'm going to do this so that I can do this, so I can do this, so I can do this. And for me, anyway, that's been my life experience and how things have played out.
Thank you for sharing that. It's a really important point because I think, in my conversations, a lot of times people will ask, how can I design this playbook? And my answer a lot of times is, don't try to design it. You can take shots, and you can design experiments for your career and see if it takes you closer to the goal. And if not, and redesign another experiment, because looking back, you will probably feel that everything was a connected thread. But when you look forward, it doesn't seem like it.
Exactly. Yeah, I think looking at it as experiments is a great way. And of course, that's what we do in product in general. But applying that same sort of thinking to to one's career, I think makes a lot of sense. I think what it also brings out, and you're probably at a point in your career where a lot of people are asking you for advice now about what should I do? Should I take this job? And certainly that's been happening with me a lot as well. And I usually try and frame it for people as, look, you're going to have to find the job that makes sense right now. And you need to put everything you possibly can into that job. You have maybe 10% of your attention is on the next job, and getting yourself positioned for that. But you can't put too much emphasis on that because you'll mess up the one that you're in, right? You really do genuinely need to embody the one you're in and do the best that you can with an eye toward the future, but not too much of an eye toward the future.
That's such a great advice. Chris, why don't we take a journey through your career over so many years? And what do you believe led you from all these different product companies to now your current role at SVPG?
Yeah. So here's the narrative again as I look backward, right? So I started as an engineer. My degree was in computer science. Didn't really have a lot of thought as to where this was going to go, other than I thought, okay, I'm going to be a developer, right? I'm doing okay at this academic thing. My first couple of jobs were around development. Really didn't stay with it that long because I learned that I was really terrible at it. I was just awful. I was. It wasn't that I didn't understand how to program. It's just I wasn't able to get into the right mindset with it. I was too architectural about it. I couldn't be experimental enough for whatever reason. I couldn't just let it flow. One of the things I noticed was whenever I was coding and like debugging or something like that, I wouldn't blink. Like an hour would go by. It's like my eyes are killing me because I just couldn't blink. I would just get so caught up in all of this. But anyway, I did end up kind of leaving that sort of work, and for a little while actually went into something completely different. I was in film production for a little while, working mostly on documentary films and some sort of corporate training. And that was an interesting period of time. I wasn't doing that for too long, maybe 2 years or so, but I really did start to get a sense of stories and design and experience, and more so than I ever did in engineering, development purely, was really putting myself in the mind of somebody consuming something that I was producing. That work actually led to me forming a small company. It was basically a product design agency, and did that for almost 8 years or so. Small group. This was kind of around the dawn of the World Wide Web. I'm a good bit older than probably most of the people here. So this was mid 90s into the early 2000s. And we worked with companies who were kind of coping with this technology, either viewing it as a threat or viewing it as an opportunity. In some cases, it was internal for their own operations. There was a term that everybody used called the intranet. This is our own private internet, and how are we going to use this to do what we need to do? But more and more of it was actually for real products, and kind of bringing that kind of web user experience into their product, kind of interface surfaces. And we did a lot of work there. And really that was the work. It was interestingly, that was where I actually first met Marty Kagan. So one of my clients during this period was Netscape, and Marty was a VP of product management there. And so we kind of started our friendship and kind of communication at that point. From there, I went into product management formally as I kind of shut that company down. And you mentioned a company called Vontu, and Vontu is an interesting company. They're a bit in the rearview mirror now for the industry, but anybody who was around might have heard of them. It was a subcategory within security, information security. Vontu created the label of data loss prevention, so DLP, if you ever heard about that market. And this was truly a category-defining product. A company, this hadn't existed before. We sort of set the frame for the set of competitors, and kind of how the market looked at these solutions, how companies budgeted, for this sort of thing. Didn't realize, so I was the leader of product management at this company, and from it being very small up to the point where Symantec purchased them, and I didn't really realize it at the time, but this place was truly magical. The people who worked there, and how much I learned from this place. There's still a huge part of my life right now. Everybody talks about their tech mafias, the PayPal mafia and the Netscape mafia and all of that. There's a Vontu mafia, and if you were in it, and you're still in touch with all of those people. Good friend of mine was one of the co-founders. I remember a particular day working with him, and we were griping about something. Something was just pissing us both off, and we were going off. And he stopped me, and he said, "All right, Chris, I want you to take a breath for a second. All that stuff you were saying just now, it's probably true, but I'm going to make a prediction right now, and mark my words. You were going to spend the rest of your career trying to recreate what you have at this place." And it kind of put me back on my heels for a second. And it turned out to be right. Like, this was a company that absolutely got a lot of these concepts around empowerment and what it meant to really actively manage people. So it was a very formative time for me. Sorry, this is probably a longer tour than you wanted, but Symantec acquired the company. I continued to kind of run the product part of the DLP. This became a big business within Symantec. I did that for about a year. Then I worked for another year across the overall enterprise portfolio within Symantec. And then most recently, it's not that recent at this point, was a company called Lookout, still around. It's a very different company now than when I was there. When I was there, it was entirely consumer, so B2C. A lot of stuff there, but it's now entirely B2B. The consumer portion has been spun out and acquired by another company. But yeah, when I left Lookout, it was about 10 years ago, is when Marty Kagan invited me to join Silicon Valley Product Group. So I've been doing that work for the last 10 years.
Wow. It's again, it's fascinating just hearing that. And I think I love the fact, I think, that you mentioned, sometimes there are people, or sometimes there is like this one company that really makes its mark on you and kind of shapes you. I think for me, like, I always go back to Atlassian, like that just changed, and a lot of, I think, how you lead in a very human way, where you don't treat people as just resources and seats.
Right.
That need to warm the bums that need to warm the seat, but you're kind of really empowering and trusting. I think that's what shaped me. And so it's amazing to hear from you as well that there was a company like that. And I always tell people, like, when you're trying to think, like, find that one company that you can kind of really learn and has that impact so that you can take it further and recreate something like that. in your career. Awesome.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you've had that experience as well, and that you have had enough experiences to realize that it's actually a rare thing when it happens.
Very rare.
And many of the companies, other companies that I've seen are very good at kind of talking the talk. We're all about people, and we really have a commitment to that. But it's rare the companies that truly make decisions and prioritize that over everything else. Decisions, the things that they will decide actively not to do because they are going to be, making room for that people investment.
100%. No, absolutely. It has a very special place. It's a very, very special place. Like this is a joke in my family. Every time I'm kind of like, oh, I have this enough. And then my husband will always ask me, so Atlassian just spoiled you. And I'm like, yeah,
totally.
They did. They truly did. So
it's your job now to pay it forward. That's how which is what you're doing, right?
Yes, 100%. Yeah. Chris, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. And what go-to habits would you suggest, as teams, product leaders are beginning to really think about innovation? I mean, every single company is now being forced to rethink innovation in very different ways, especially at times when tech is not living its life in the world of plenty. Innovation is taking a very different shape and form. What would be some of go-to habits that you would recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, there's so many. Maybe I should probably come at this from two different directions, because so Silicon Valley Product Group, SVPG, a lot of what we do is exactly this, helping companies get aligned around a set of practices and competencies and that sort of thing that really do bring about innovation in ways that they're oftentimes just incapable of doing. And the two important perspectives to consider, there are the individuals and what the individuals are doing, and how they're trying to organize their days and where they're putting their priorities. But then there's just the overall operating model that they're inside of. So you can have the best intentioned and the best skilled, let's say, product manager who really knows how to do all these things around innovation. But, if the organization just will, have organ rejection on something like that, because it's just not how they work. We need you to follow this process, and we need you to fill out this requirements document, and, that sort of thing. It becomes really tough. So I can give a couple of practices, for individuals, things to do, especially when you're, finding yourself, kind of fighting the machine on something like this. But really where we do focus is on the machine, so we'll work with the parts of the company that are, whether they know it or not, establishing what these models are internally. So, but I'm not sure that's going to be the most effective for the people who are listening to this. So as far as an individual contributor, if you're really trying to get more aligned with a product model like this, some of these things are going to sound very cliche, but they're cliche for a reason. They really do matter. I'd say the single biggest one is knowing your customers. Whoever they happen to be. It might be a user body, it might be actual paying customers. There is probably some constituency that you as a product manager are responsible for. And one of the things to kind of hold yourself accountable to is, like, are you the actual acknowledged expert in the company on those people? That's a pretty high bar. A lot of times, like, wow, the sales department knows so much, or the head of product knows so much, or the CEO knows so much. That's all really true. If you're a product manager who's serving those customers, you need to be sitting at the table with those people. You need to know as much, if not more. So whatever you can do to create practices to make this part of your day job. A lot of times, a product manager will say, I know I need to talk to customers more. I got a break in my schedule in like 3 weeks, and I'm lining up all this stuff, and I'm going to do it there. It's like, okay, great. That's better than nothing. much, much better if you set up things that allow you to do this on just a regular basis and you treat it actually as your day job. So that's the first thing. Again, I know it's cliche and I know what I just described. In some cases, it's hard to do that, but figuring out ways, making relationships with a couple of salespeople so that you can actually do it, understanding what's going on within your customer success team. These are B2B techniques. With consumer, it's easier. It should be easier. But anyway, that's the first thing. So knowing your customer. And there is another one, you as the product manager are not only responsible for ensuring that what gets built is valuable to your customers, you need to ensure that what you're building is viable for the business. And in order to do this, you have to be really curious and conscious of how everything works. Like, how are we making money? How does the sales force work with this? How are they trying to sell it? What is our marketing department saying about why are they choosing these words versus those words? Why does everybody say that we can't do this due to regulations? What regulation? Can I read it? Can I talk to the lawyer who's responsible for it? Those types of things are part of the product management job as well. And many people sort of take that stuff for granted. It's like, oh yeah, somebody asked me to build this, they must know all that stuff. So, your question is about, kind of the innovation part. If you don't know those things, you are just not in a position to innovate. Your ideas are not going to be very worthwhile. So yeah, I have a few other things I could put in there. Like I said, this is sort of our business. So, but I'll just leave it at those two: know the business and know your customer.
And they're so fundamental first principle thinking.
Yeah.
I think there is a reason why you say that these are cliche. I think two things that come to my mind. I think something that I remember one of my managers very early on in my career really encouraged me to do was block my calendar every day, where I would either spend time just shadowing someone in the sales team or customer support or customer success, or actually scheduling short conversations with customers, not for any particular feature or a product or a problem, but it was just having that conversation to really have that pulse. And it really helped, because in the beginning it was so painful, but over time it just became a habit. And if I didn't talk to them, I would just feel like I haven't accomplished something, right?
Yeah. I'm guessing this was an Atlassian experience.
No.
Oh, interesting.
It was actually in a company that was trying to shift very much from a very project-centric model into a product-centric model.
Right.
And they were just forced to do it. The business was just tanking, and I think maybe it was a necessity, and they read this somewhere. But
well, I commend your manager. I mean, that's some solid coaching, to really, because not only were they directing you to do this, but they were implicitly giving you permission to do this, right? To prioritize this over the 50 other things that also needed to get done, saying that this is important enough that you're going to block time every week. So yeah, that's fantastic.
It stayed with me all these years, like even now. I do this. And I think the second thing that you mentioned about being interested and curious in how your business is making money, it is so important. A lot of times I think we just consume and take something at face value as product managers, that we don't actually take that interest. We're like, oh, I don't have an MBA, I'm not going to understand. And it's not about an MBA. It's not about financial accounting. I think it's just basic math, right? How does the company save money, make money? What are some of the risks, regulatory concerns, and things like that, so that you can 100%. I love that. Okay. Love that. The next question that I have, is in all these different companies that you've worked, Chris, also in companies through SVPG that you're kind of coaching and training to build these operating models, what have you seen maybe some of the common mistakes, the traps that as humans we fall into?
Yeah. So again, I got a lot of answers for this, but I'll just pick a couple. At the most fundamental level, again, if we're talking about product managers or the kind of the on the ground teams that are building the products, it's a misunderstanding of who they are serving. They see their job as serving the business or this particular stakeholder, or like the phrase that makes us all crazy at SVPG is like, oh yeah, that stakeholder is my customer. It's like, no, your company's customers are your customer. That stakeholder may be shaping it, and they may be providing some constraints around the business along the way, but we should just never lose sight of who the real customer is in all of this. So, one of the things that SVPG says all the time is that, your job is to serve the customer in ways that work for the business. It's not just to serve the business. And that seems like just a little bit of wordplay, but it is a profoundly different orientation. And when you talk with somebody who's oriented that way, you see how different it is in all of their actions and all of the things that they're actually pursuing. So that's the first one. And what should we do for a second one? So here's one that I certainly had to learn this the hard way myself. It's thinking that go-to-market is entirely somebody else's job and it's not part of product. And I think maybe the universe is a little bit better on this, in the last decade or so, but certainly when I was kind of coming up through product management, it was really a hard separation. It's marketing's job, it's sales job. I build it, they sell it, that sort of thing. And just not realizing, even at the most primitive level, what you build is absolutely influenced by how it's sold and how it's marketed. And, Vontu was a great example of this. This is where I really first saw it. And, kind of my first aha on the whole thing was when we did a lot of user experience work on that. It's one of the things that kind of made that product go. We invested in that in a way that other security products hadn't. And this realization that, the users use this thing and they're the ones who are ultimately going to be operating the interface. But at the end of the day, how we architect this whole experience has massive implications on how it's sold. Or maybe I say that the other way. How we sell it has massive implications on how we might actually architect the experience. Just how people think about, in our case, it was about risk and who the people operating and mitigating that risk would be, and what our policies around confidential data and all of that sort of stuff. Like how that all manifested in the product was so heavily influenced by how we were selling and who we were selling to and all of those sorts of things, that if anybody on the product management team didn't understand that, we had no prayer of building a successful product. So just realizing that, back to kind of being curious about how the business works, this is probably the first thing you need to be the most curious about. I know for many people, this is fundamental and they get this, but there are a lot of product managers out there, especially ones who maybe have come up through the technical side of things, which was really how I came up through it. That realizing that the go-to-market in some cases is actually even more important than what you're building.
It's really fundamental. I love that. I used to do this exercise with my PMs on a regular basis. And we would actually have every single PM in my team talk about the value proposition of the product. It was so interesting that even for PMs who had been leading those products for months and years, often they
couldn't do it.
No. And I was like, that is so interesting.
You'd start to describe features or things like this, and just not really understand how it connected with the customer.
No. And it was a very, very valuable exercise, and I think it really brought in the PMs closer to it. But I just love this.
There's one just kind of technique on this. I know I keep bringing up some B2B examples, but I always liked to have every product manager on the team be sort of a product sponsor on at least one deal in progress at any given time, which meant that they had a close relationship with that sales rep. They were probably going to some sales meetings. We had to be careful not to allow their job to be too consumed by this single customer point of view or just a couple of customers. But just by seeing and actively participating in the process of getting a deal over the goal line, it's impossible not to understand it and just have some sympathy for the go-to-market and how that actually works and what the product could be doing better and And it's not just, adding features, it's usually how things are positioned, how things are structured, maybe where we need to adjust the vision of the product, all of that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also like speaking about the problem in the language of your user, because a lot of times I think there is that internal language, and oftentimes how we speak about a particular problem is very different than how our users might be talking. And that disconnect often leads to unexpected outcomes towards the end, right?
Right.
I'm going to take a question from the audience, Chris. So Corey is asking, how do you gauge when it's time to move on from one to another, or to maybe a new experience?
Yeah. So yeah, it's a great question. In my case, I kind of just knew. It just, it did feel like this had run its course. I usually am somebody who advocates you want to hang in there for a little while. There was a period where, especially, the job market's kind of flipped around now pretty dramatically, but there was a period of 10 or 15 years or so where it was very much, the seller's market, right? The workers had all the power and people were just hopping from job to job. And, that opportunity may not be here that much right now. But sorry, it just started to rain. Hopefully it's not too loud. But you really do need to stay in a job for at the very least a couple of years before you're really getting to the point where you're adding consistent value. And my number was usually 4 years. I really tried to make it for 4 years. And I would have there'd be a dip, right around 2 years. It's like, I'm not sure I'm liking this anymore. And then I'd find some ways to change some things and get reinvigorated and get to a new point. And then, probably try and get it out about 4 years. So I think the main way, I guess, is if you're really not learning and growing, if you're not learning and growing, that's probably the time to be looking for the next thing. And specifically also, if you don't see a path to changing that, these are always conversations that you should really start with your first line manager and have and say, hey, look, I'm feeling, is there a way we can fix this? There's something that can be done. The problem may be your manager, in which case you're probably not going to get very far, and that's a good time to leave. So hopefully there's something in there.
Yeah, no, very good points, Chris. I think I remember some of the conversations that we have in PMDojo as well, and that is sometimes it may not just be a line manager who is responsible for making decisions behind closed doors, and so it's really also important to start building relationships with skip level and the people above, so that if you do feel like you're not learning and growing, maybe there is an opportunity to take up a project from a senior leader and work on something.
Or laterally, building those relationships laterally as well. There might be just something, even if it's a lateral move and the general responsibilities are the same, if it's in a different part of the portfolio or a different part of the company, you can reinvigorate learning again and leverage what you did in one place to another.
Yeah, 100%. What is one action that you're going to recommend? And we're going to take this in 3 different levels, like for IC product manager, maybe another action for a product leader who's leading IC PMs, and another one for maybe like a CEO in a company. And I know you've talked a lot about this, you and Marty, in your book, Transformed. It's an amazing book. I just finished reading it a couple of days ago. It was amazing. Yeah. It's kind of bringing a lot of memories back. So absolutely recommend that. But what would be that one action that is so crucial that you
I think we've kind of hit a few. Sorry, I stepped on your question there, but I think I know where you were going. We kind of talked about it a bit on the product management side, this knowing your customers and users better. I don't know if I can smuggle in the knowing your business also, if that counts as 2, but really just getting that broad-based knowledge, on those sorts of things. And on the leader side, there's differences of leaders. I mean, you've experienced some of our content, there's kind of that first line manager and then kind of all the way up. All leaders, but especially the first line managers, I think the realization that the most important job you have is coaching your team. That's a bit flip for a lot of people. Means that you're spending, especially like a first line manager, usually it's at least 50% of your time is around coaching the people on your team, helping them develop, the types of things that manager that you described from your past, who helped you develop a regular cadence for knowing your customers. That's just one facet of it, but that kind of bringing people along, also ensuring that everybody understands the broader strategic context that everybody's operating in, that people truly understand the vision of the product and where we're headed. People truly understand what we're focusing on now, what we're focusing on later, what we're focusing on never, all of those sorts of things. So realizing that your success as a manager or leader is not the things you're directly touching. It's the people on your team and what they're being successful at. Again, words, right? Lots of words, and it sounds pretty obvious, but it's actually a pretty profound thing. Mm-hmm. At the company level, this is kind of the main motivator to why to really adopt these practices. That kind of it's getting to that innovation side of things. But the core of this is you're trying to set up a series of incentives and ways of doing things that get your broader product organization, which includes engineering and it includes user experience and in many cases data and all that stuff, oriented around the outcomes that they're trying to achieve, as opposed to the things they're shipping, or the output, right? So when you have a team that's measured and measuring itself by how successful something is at achieving whatever goal it had, so rather than looking at it as we shipped the new onboarding workflow, it's we were successful at reducing the amount of time it took to successfully onboard a new customer by 2/3, right? And that's what our goal was. And yeah, there was a little bit of work we did here, but we did some other things here, and it was on us to figure that stuff out. So it's at the company level, that's what we're trying to do, is get more and more of the conversation and the actual accountability to be around outcomes. So, yeah.
Really solid points. And I think each one has a role to play. I don't think one can say, oh, I cannot do this. My hands are tied because my manager is not supporting. The manager can say, well, my hands are tied because as a company we are this. I think it is hard. Any kind of change, I think changing status quo is so hard, but I think you can do little and little and little. And I think that's how transformation anyway happens, right? Like they can be radical, but usually incrementally you can achieve a lot more, especially if there's resistance to change. I love these. I love these, absolutely.
I like the point that you just made, though, too, because it's very easy, especially if you're that individual contributor, to just feel paralyzed because, well, okay, my company does this, and my manager does this, and yeah, you're right. There's only so far that the company's going to be able to get, but you are not, as an individual, powerless. There are still things you can do in order to up your game and help, because all of these things influence each other. There's no on the other side of it, you can say, I'm an individual contributor. Here, we'll do one side and then the other. I'm an individual contributor, but this business stakeholder is telling me what to build, and I have to build what they're telling me to build. I'm stuck. The company's never going to change, whatever. But think about it from the point of view of the business stakeholder. It's like, okay, look, I get it. The company is telling me, we need to be doing this in this way, but I just don't trust that this person knows the customer at all. Like, how could they possibly make better decisions than me? I want to do this, but I can't, right? So there is very much a chicken and an egg, and we all have to understand what our own individual responsibilities are in this and begin to advance things and realize that we're going to affect each other.
Yeah. Kind of reminds me, I think, again, I go back to one of my managers, and the thing that I learned from her was that she said, as a product manager, it was relatively early in my career, and she said, as a product manager, you think you don't have power, but you can actually change a lot of things, even if you feel you can't, because a big part of your role is evangelizing.
Yeah.
Remember, she said, remember the business stakeholders that you're working with, they don't know product management, just like you don't know how sales is being done in and out. So if you go and talk about it like a product manager, they're not going to get it. So talk in simple English, make it
Right.
easy for them, and start kind of changing. Don't
Right.
talk about what is done. Don't talk about velocity. You may have a
Yeah.
different audience for that, but talk
Right.
about, again, what you did to move the needle up. And
Yeah.
it was really hard to comprehend at that time, but I think gradually she just kept on nudging and nudging, and she was a great role model. And so I think
Yeah.
seeing her really helped, I think, make those shifts. So I think what you say, I love it. Chris, thank you. I'll take another audience question. So Lynn is saying, what are some of the tactics for someone, and I think you've touched on a little bit of this, but especially for bottom-up innovation?
For bottom-up innovation. Yeah, I mean, so I'll put it into the framework that we've been talking about. The best tactic is, first of all, actually, we'll back up even further. You start with a team, right? You're largely, it's done with small teams. We might have a lot of teams banded together, but there is a bit of autonomy within that team, and you've got some dedicated cross-functional people there. Obviously, we have our engineers, and there might be any number of different stripes of engineers depending on what the charter of the team is. There's a dedicated product manager. Ideally, there's a dedicated designer, especially if this is in any way customer or user facing. And the point here is these groups have to collaborate, and they have to collaborate on a really intense basis. It's not just like, yeah, I need to do lunch with my designer every week. It's more like every day we are doing something together, looking at a prototype, rolling up our sleeves on things and kicking it around. So that construct is a really good unit of work for creating this type of innovation. But the main thing that flips the switch on it is back to, how is work allocated onto that team? Are you asking the team to build a feature or satisfy some part of a roadmap, or are you giving them a problem to solve and holding them accountable for the solution to the problem, and specifically holding them accountable for how well the problem has been solved? This is a really different pattern of incentives. Imagine yourself as an engineer on a team like that. You're not anymore being told your job is to ship this particular thing on time. You're being told, we have to cut the time it takes to onboard a new customer in half, by the end of the quarter. Right? I'm an engineer. I'm a problem solver. I'm going to be really suspicious of somebody who just puts a bunch of requirements on my desk. I'm going to be really suspicious of some design that isn't accompanied by maybe some experimental data, even if it's just subjective, qualitative. We interviewed like 6 people, and this is kind of what we saw actually happening. So it motivates a very different type of work, and it motivates a very different type of back and forth. And, what I've seen throughout my career is that's really where the best innovations emerge. You set that system up in place, and those things can come out, right? You can't be innovative on demand. Okay, you need to go innovate, go think of that idea. It's like you put this group together and you give them a problem and you hold them accountable to finding a solution, and innovation happens, right? That's basically it.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of what I just described, that may be beyond the power of an individual contributor, right? If you don't have teams, and if you don't have the ability to work this way in terms of outcomes, that's going to be tough. But as you said, you can evangelize, you can try and influence, you can certainly get yourself smarter so that you're having more high-level, outcome-oriented conversations with the people who are asking you to build things. And all of that's going to move you down that path.
Yeah. Start small. I think your things you had written about pilot teams. I think just do it with your team. Don't try to make this organization-wide change. Right? Prove it up. Prove it out. And if you start getting wins, and then you can start replicating and trying with other teams as well. Absolutely love it. If you were to start your product career today, Chris, what would you do differently?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because I took a strange route. There were a lot of little detours, and there were places where I did better than others, and places where I look back and I still go, that was not my best performance. And I don't want to lose any of those experiences, because I think they all shaped me in one way or another. I can say though, I think especially early in my career, a lot of what drove me was fear more than anything else. Like a lot of anxiety, a lot of imposter syndrome. I know many of us suffer, from that. And as I've gotten older, and especially as I've been a manager at varying levels, just learned that kind of everybody has that to some degree. And I think some are better at dealing with it than others. Some it becomes pretty pathological and debilitating, but it's always there. And I think if I were to, that kind of give yourself advice, your 20-year-old self or your 25-year-old self, just to not overthink the stuff, do your best and plunge in. The more you can learn about a situation, don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to reveal a lack of knowledge or a lack of a point of view, even though you're in a job where you're supposed to have it. You're supposed to have that point of view. You just need to make it clear when you ask those questions and you reveal it that you don't have it yet, right? It's you're working to build it. And I find that people are generally, for the most part, they won't take advantage of you. In fact, most people are more flattered than anything else that you're asking them for their input. One little turn of phrase that I think is helpful in this whole thing, I'm actually even starting to coach my kids along this, sort of way of thinking, is moving away from saying, what should I do, to what would you do, right? That little difference, basically, you're still getting input, but you're not shifting the responsibility for the decision to somebody else. You still hold it. It's still your decision to take that input or not, but you can harvest all of that and get whatever wisdom is there. It's a very different thing. You keep the agency, but you still allow yourself to be vulnerable and say, I'm not ready to make a decision yet on something. So that I wish I learned a little earlier, I guess. But otherwise, I'll take the licks, even though some of them were pretty painful.
I love that. I'm gonna try to adopt it with my 9-year-old. What would you do? It's a really powerful question. Love it. Awesome. And I think on the imposter syndrome, I just want to share, I think you're right. Everyone has it. And I go back to, I don't know if you watched Mike Cannon-Brookes' imposter syndrome talk, I think quite a few years ago in TED.
Yeah. I haven't seen it, but I've heard all about it. I know it was a big topic of discussion for a while.
He talks about this very similarly to what you're saying, and he always uses the word use it for the force of good, not to hold you back. And it's not about conquering it and managing it and all of that. And I think that's kind of, I didn't even know of the term or the phrase imposter syndrome back in the day when I started my career. I absolutely love it. Chris, any parting reminders for PMs and product leaders? I know we've talked at length today about these two groups, but any parting?
Yeah, let's see. What would I say here? I think product is a very hard job, but it's the best job in the world. It's incredibly rewarding, but it's messy. It's a messy sort of thing. I think, the imposter syndrome, I think just realizing that everybody has it, there's a little bit of liberation in there. Even your manager has it. Even the most confident seeming person in your organization, they especially have it. They've just come up with a real, bold way of coping with it. So just realize that. Yeah. And I love that. I need to go check that out, but using it for good rather than treating it as something that needs to be conquered. And, there's one other, actually, I was thinking about this. One of the other SVPG partners, his name is Christian Idioti. I was recently listening to a podcast that he was on, and he said something that I thought was really profound. It was almost like a throwaway thing for him. He's kind of amazing in that respect. But he basically was talking about willing yourself to care about something, willing yourself to really be, I need to care more about my customers, or I need to really care more about my business. Sometimes we look at that as the job and we feel like we're deficient in it and we feel less than, and we're trying to figure out, it's like, I can't figure out how to conjure that up. And he had a way of cutting through that. It's like, that's not the job. The job is go learn as much as you can. Learn about your customers, learn about the business. You will find that after you do that, it's impossible not to care. Right? The caring comes about from having that knowledge. You will have opinions. If you're feeling self-conscious about not having opinions, your job is not to go form opinions. Your job is to go learn as much about the situation, and you're going to find that you've got opinions then. So he didn't spend as much time on that as I just did, but that was where it landed with me. And I actually haven't even, I was going to pick up the phone and call him and say, this is awesome. We need to say this thing more. But it hit me in a very kind of profound way.
I love it. It is very nuanced, but it is so powerful because it also reframes, I think, the pressure that we put on ourselves to have the answers all of the time. Right. And I think if you reframe it to like, you're going to learn, I think that just takes the pressure off a little bit, I feel, at least personally.
Yeah, me too.
Absolutely love it, Chris. This has been amazing. This has been really, really awesome. And again, thank you, Chris, for taking the time. I know you are super, super busy. So I really appreciate when you said yes and agreed to come. And for everyone who's joined us today, I hope you found today's chat really helpful. Continue to put in, your questions. I'm going to try to answer, and I'm also going to share some of the resources that we talked about today. And until then, have an amazing April. And thank you again, Chris, for joining. This was amazing.
I had a really wonderful time. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And hopefully we get to see each other in person sometime.
Definitely.
See you, everyone. Bye-bye.